No one in the Morel family suspected that the summer BBQ that day would become a point of no return. Lena Morel, the quiet eldest sister, 38 years old, living a life that seemed unremarkable in the eyes of her parents, and her dazzling younger sister Camille, was the one holding a shocking secret. While Camille excitedly boasted that she was about to be interviewed at Vero Analytics, the European tech giant she dreamed of working for, Elena simply smiled gently and quietly poured wine into her glass. No one knew that Elena was actually the founder and powerful CEO of Vero Analytics, a business empire she had silently built over more than a decade. And Camille, the younger sister who was always praised for her MBA and her family's admiration, was about to step into a life-changing interview, where she would be unmasked by the very sister she had once looked down on. The truth is waiting to be revealed. And when it is, it won't just be a shock. It will be an earthquake in the heart of the Morel family. The rich aroma of grilled meat wafted through the Morel family's backyard. Lavender petals swayed gently in the summer breeze, and laughter filled the air under the warm Saturday afternoon sun. It was the picture of a perfect day. Elena sat quietly at the long table, swirling a glass of red wine in her hand, her eyes following her family members as they chatted animatedly, none of them seeming to notice her presence. "Camille really is the pride of the family," said their mother Yvonne, her voice full of pride. "An MBA from Paris, and now she's got an interview with some big company. Vero or something." "Vero Analytics, Mom," Camille corrected, her tone confident and just a bit boastful. "The third largest data firm in Europe. They're extremely selective, and I've been invited to interview for a market strategy position. It's a stepping stone to executive leadership." Elena smiled faintly and set her glass on the table. Nothing had changed. The spotlight always found Camille. Meanwhile, she, the quiet eldest daughter, was seen as a woman with a dull life and no clear direction, despite having built a tech empire from scratch. "What about you, Elena?" her father suddenly asked, his voice polite but clearly perfunctory. "Anything new lately? Still working at that small consulting firm?" "Yes, still the same," Elena replied briefly without correcting him. She was long used to her family skimming over her life like it was a footnote in Camille's thick book of achievements. Camille smirked. "You should try applying to big companies like I do. You'll never grow stuck in those little firms forever. Do you even know what Vero is? I guess this industry might be a bit out of your depth." A knife cutting meat wouldn't hurt as much as those sugar-coated words, but Elena didn't react. She simply smiled, a kind of smile people often mistake for resignation, but was in fact calm control, the smile of someone who knew exactly where she stood in the game. She recalled the board meeting from 3 days ago. She, Elena Morel, had just signed the decision to expand Vero's branches into the Nordic market. The company had over 600 full-time employees, a global client network, and was preparing for an IPO by year's end. Meanwhile, Camille, the one bragging as if she were entering heaven, still had no idea that the person who would be evaluating her in that critical interview was the very sister she was mocking. Now, Yvonne continued. "Everyone has their own path, but honestly, your sister needs to make some changes. Almost 40 and still no family, no clear career. Thank goodness for Camille, we have someone to be proud of." Elena's heart clenched for a moment. She was used to the comparisons. She had once thought it would hurt that she would fight back. But the years had forged her into a stone wall, not to deflect blows, but to remain standing when the storm hit. She knew some people only saw brilliance when it came dressed in a cloak of prestige. "I'm confident I'll do great at Vero," Camille added, this time locking eyes with Elena as if issuing a challenge. "They need sharp thinkers with global vision, not someone who just quietly does unremarkable work." All eyes turned to Camille, the spotlight bathing her like the lead in a family play. Elena sat still, her hands resting on her knees, palms gently clenched, not in anger, but in preparation. A part of her wanted to say it all, wanted to see their faces freeze in shock. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she raised her glass and clinked it lightly against Camille's. "Good luck," she said softly. "Vero is an interesting place. Camille frowned, sensing something in her sister's gaze she couldn't quite decipher, but she shrugged it off, so confident she didn't even consider doubt. The party ended with polite hugs, scripted advice, and invisible glances all cast toward the family's favorite Camille. Elena left like a shadow, but a shadow holding a light no one there was wise enough to see. On her way back to her penthouse in the city center, Elena opened her phone and reviewed the candidate files for the strategic interview round. Camille Morel's name was on the list. Under notes, she herself had written, "Strong academic potential, but needs close evaluation on attitude and real-world competence." Elena smiled. Not a smug smile, nor a victorious one. It was the smile of someone who knew the storm was coming, but this time she was the one steering it. The black Mercedes glided silently through the tree-lined streets of Montreux's financial district. Elena rested her head against the window, her gaze distant. That summer, BBQ had felt like a tedious play she was forced to attend, not out of family obligation, but as a reminder of why she no longer belonged there. When the car pulled up in front of the sleek glass tower bearing the elegant silver letters, Vero Analytics, she stepped out dressed in a minimalist yet commanding outfit. A crisp white Italian blouse, a fitted black pencil skirt, her hair neatly tied back. The receptionist immediately bowed in greeting. "Good morning, Madame Morel." Elena nodded. No introduction was needed. Here her name carried weight like a brand. No one at the company called her Elena. To them, she was CEO Morel, the founder and strategist who had grown the company from a humble startup into Europe's leading data tech empire. She entered the private elevator that led straight to the 42nd floor home to the executive office with a panoramic view of the Paris skyline. Everything here reflected who she was: efficient, clean, unadorned. On her desk were 3 candidate files marked in red, prepared for the senior-level interviews scheduled for early next week. She pulled out the middle file, Camille Morel. The name made the corner of her lips curl into a smile that was hard to define. Camille, the pampered younger sister, the one who once said Elena would never understand the world of truly ambitious people. Now Camille was about to walk into an interview in Elena's office, and bitterly neither Camille nor the rest of the family knew that Elena was the founder of Vero. For years, Elena had stayed out of the public eye as CEO. She let her media assistant handle press relations, avoided personal interviews. That choice wasn't out of shyness, it was because she understood the value of anonymity. In a world obsessed with showmanship, she chose to let success speak for itself. Elena's success wasn't a matter of luck. It was the result of thousands of sleepless nights, repeated rejections from investors, and unyielding resilience when her early co-founders walked away. Vero had started as a modest data project, helping businesses analyze customer behavior. Now it provided strategic solutions to over 300 global corporations, from retail chains in Germany to oil conglomerates in the UAE. And now she was about to personally interview the sister who had never respected her. Elena bore no grudge, but she didn't forget. She didn't forget the look of pity in her father's eyes when he told her, "You should find a man to lean on." Nor Camille's mocking smile when she heard Elena was still running a few little projects. They never saw her silence as a choice, only as a sign of failure. She opened the internal email system and typed a short command to HR. "Confirm Camille Morel for the interview round. I will conduct the interview personally. Do not disclose the CEO's identity to the candidate. EM." She set her coffee cup down and took a deep breath. Elena's decisions were always rooted in reason, not emotion. She wasn't exposing Camille to seek revenge, but because she believed her company deserved people with both competence and the right attitude. Camille might be academically bright, but Elena needed more than that. She needed strategic thinking, the ability to listen, and the humility to learn. Traits Camille, raised on praise and entitlement, might not possess. A notification popped up. Strategic meeting with the executive board in 5 minutes. Elena stood and walked toward the window where the Paris sky stretched endlessly. Everything would start to change from this point, not just for Camille, but for the entire Morel family. They would soon realize that the failure they had looked down on was the very woman leading one of the most influential tech corporations on the continent. And this time, Elena would not stay silent. That morning, the atmosphere at Vero Analytics headquarters had a peculiar energy. The usually quiet hallways buzzed with movement. One of the company's most important hiring rounds was about to take place. The HR department was searching for a new project director, someone who would be responsible for expanding Vero's presence into Central Europe. Camille Morel walked into the building with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. She wore a cream coat from Balmain's spring collection, her hair in soft curls, lips a bold red. In her hand was a thick, full-color arsum, prominently featuring MBA, HEC Paris at the top. Her eyes gleamed with the look of someone certain the interview would be a mere formality. She had no idea that the person she'd be facing today, neither the head of HR nor a department manager, was the woman she and her family had long dismissed as a failure with no real drive, her older sister, Elena Morel. On the 39th floor in the interview room, Elena was already seated. She sat at the center of the long table flanked by two senior executives. They had been explicitly instructed not to reveal Elena's identity to the candidate. When Camille entered, there was a fleeting moment of eye contact between the sisters. But Camille, distracted by the room's elegance and the authoritative presence of those inside, didn't recognize Elena. No one addressed Elena by name. She simply nodded as though the two women had never met. "Hello," Camille said, her gaze sweeping the room, her tone slightly haughty. "Glad to be here. I assume you've reviewed my RSUM?" Elena gave a subtle nod. "We've reviewed it thoroughly," she replied calmly. "You seem to have an impressive academic background." Camille smiled as if confirming something self-evident. "I believe I'm a strong candidate to lead the development projects in Central Europe. I've previously managed a team during my internship at Deloitte, and I have strong connections with several foreign investors." Elena glanced at the HR director, who nodded and opened his laptop. "Then let's start with a few situational questions," Elena said. "If a major client in Austria suddenly requested a complete restructuring of their analytics system within 3 weeks, but the Berlin tech team was understaffed, how would you handle it?" Camille hesitated briefly, then gave a slight smile. "I suppose I'd reassign resources, maybe bring in a freelance team temporarily." Elena's expression remained neutral. "Which budget would you use for those freelancers, considering the financial plan hasn't been approved?" Camille pressed her lips together. "I guess I'd persuade the client to make an advance payment." One of the other executives furrowed his brow slightly. Elena continued, before Camille could regain composure. "If the Berlin team resisted citing overload and requested a project delay, how would you manage that internal conflict?" Camille seemed thrown off. "I would probably call an emergency meeting and ask them to prioritize the new project." Elena looked directly at her sister, not with familial warmth, but with the evaluating gaze of a leader appraising an unprepared candidate. "Do you believe making decisions through command, without understanding staffing pressures, could lead to a mental health crisis within the team?" Elena asked, her voice steady and low. Camille was silent. The confident smile had vanished. Her eyes began to waver. The evaluation continued. Elena posed a hypothetical involving client tech disputes, multinational coordination, and dealing with media fallout after a data mishap. Camille began to stumble. Her answers became increasingly disjointed, contradictory. When asked about long-term strategy, she fell back on empty MBA jargon. Elena closed the interview with a simple question. "What do you think is the most important quality in a manager?" Camille, after a pause, answered, "Ambition. Without ambition, people will always be left behind." Elena remained quiet for a moment. Then she stood closing her laptop. "This concludes the interview," she said, turning to the two executives. "Thank you both. I'll make the final decision." Camille stood too clearly unsettled. The atmosphere had shifted. As she turned to leave, she couldn't help dropping a final pointed comment. "Regardless, I'm grateful for the chance to speak with the leadership of a company like this, even if sometimes the standards feel a bit disconnected from reality." Elena didn't reply. She just smiled faintly. The door closed behind Camille, and Elena knew the time had come to reveal who she truly was. Camille left the interview room with footsteps no longer steady like when she arrived. Her expensive high heels now felt heavy, each step crushing the confidence that had just shattered inside her. Her mind still lingered on the image of the calm, authoritative woman with sharp eyes and a composed yet powerful voice, the woman she didn't recognize as Elena. She descended in the elevator, clutching her folder tightly, a sense of confusion morphing into a simmering, indescribable anger. Camille couldn't understand why the interview had turned so harsh. Why did they interrogate her like an inexperienced student? And that woman? Why did she look at her with such a strangely familiar gaze? On the 39th floor, Elena stood by the glass window, silently gazing at the sprawling city below. A light rain began to fall over Paris. Droplets traced down the glass like the sorrow that had haunted her for years, when her own family viewed her as an outsider, a failure unworthy of trust. There was a time when Elena had been just like Camille, believing that degrees would save everything. But life had taught her a harsher lesson. The world doesn't bow to pretty diplomas, only to those who rise from failure and create true value. And now she was living proof of that truth. She picked up her phone and sent a single message. "Dinner tonight, Mom's house. I'll be there." That evening at Madame Morel's house, the mother of Elena and Camille, the atmosphere was familiar, lively, self-congratulatory, and full of artificial glamour. Madame Morel, long known in Parisian high society for her image-curating soirees, was always proud of having two proper daughters. But in truth, she only ever praised Camille, the pretty, high-achieving, ambitious younger daughter, while treating Elena like a shadow to be ignored. Dinner began with a toast to Camille for making it to the interview round at Virot. Everyone raised their glasses in celebration as if the job was already hers. "I told you," Camille said with a smug smile, glancing at Elena, who sat quietly at the corner of the table. "An MBA from HEC always pays off." "And what about you, Elena?" their mother asked, barely interested. "Still selling insurance these days?" Elena placed her wineglass down, her expression calm. She felt the familiar, pitying gaze from her mother, the condescending smirk from Camille, and the uneasy silence of their father, who always stayed out of it when the sisters clashed. Camille chimed in with a half-laugh. "Funny enough, I almost worked for that company, Virot Analytics. I heard the founder is a woman, rare, but she's a bit cold and overly strict, no." Elena looked up. A faint smile curled on her lips, gentle but razor-sharp. "Oh, I know, because that founder is me." The words landed like a bomb in a room soaked in wine and vanity. Camille froze. "You? What?" "Elena Morel, CEO and founder of Virot Analytics. I was the one who interviewed you this morning." Elena said, her eyes locked on her sister's now panicked stare. No way," Camille stammered. How could you?" Their mother looked stunned, her face paling. "Are you joking?" Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. She placed it on the table. Embossed in gold on sleek black cardstock was the Virot logo. Beneath it, Elena Morel, founder and CEO. No one spoke. Only the ticking of the clock and the clink of silverware on porcelain could be heard. Camille stared at the card like it was a cruel trick. "Because I'm your sister, I stayed silent during the interview," Elena said, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. "I wanted to give you a chance to prove your real abilities, not the borrowed glow of credentials or connections. And I will not be hiring you," she added calmly. "Not because you're my sister, but because you're not ready to lead anything. You've never created value, only flaunted what others have prepared for you." Camille's face drained of color, frozen. Tears shimmered in the corners of her eyes. It wasn't clear if they were from shame, anger, or pain. But Elena said nothing more. She stood up and gave a polite nod to her parents. "Enjoy dinner. Mom's youngest. Still has a lot to learn." And with that, she walked out of the dinner, not as the failed older sister, but as a woman who had walked the hard road and become something no one in that family ever imagined. A leader, a victor, a truth no longer deniable. After that shocking evening, the Morel household fell into a long silence lasting several days. The family dinners, once the stage where Camille shone with praise and expectations, had now become a deep wound in the family's relationships. Elena, as usual, returned to the work she loved with quiet calmness, without any show. She didn't share that night's story with anyone at the company. To her, rejecting Camille was not an act of revenge or vindication, but a right and necessary choice. Camille disappeared from family gatherings for weeks. Her pride hurt, her feelings wounded, and especially the shock of being betrayed by her own older sister, whom she had always looked down on, left Camille broken. She cut off contact and even refused to answer her mother's calls. Her mother, now ashamed of the clear favoritism shown between her two daughters for so many years. Camille began to reflect on everything: the MBA degree, the arrogant lines on her CV, the achievements she once proudly claimed, and the gap in real experience she never dared to explore deeply enough to understand. For the first time in her life, Camille felt small in a world where true ability was the only real measure. One morning, Camille sent an email to Elena, no longer boastful or defensive, but a brief and sincere letter. Dear Elena, I'm sorry for everything I said and didn't say all these years. I thought you were a failure because you never showed off. But now I understand that real strength doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. If possible, I want to start learning from the beginning. Camille. Elena read the letter silently, not rushing to reply. But inside her, something began to soften. Not forgiveness, but a hope that her once arrogant little sister was truly awakening. A month later, at a mentoring event organized by Viro in cooperation with a university, Camille appeared. No designer dresses or luxury bags, she dressed simply, carrying a notebook, her eyes focused and attentive. Elena said nothing, but when she glanced over and saw Camille seriously taking notes on crisis management and business building lessons drawn from real experience, she nodded quietly. Camille was no longer a job candidate. She had become a true apprentice for the first time in her life. One evening after the seminar, Camille waited for Elena outside the building. I'm not applying for a job anymore, Camille said as Elena came out. I just want to learn. And if you allow, I want to start at the lowest position in the company. No privileges, no favors. Elena looked at her sister, seeing for the first time in Camille's eyes not competition, but humility. She was silent for a long moment before gently replying, Then apply like everyone else. If you're good enough, you'll be chosen, not because of me, but because of yourself. Camille smiled for the first time, a truly grateful smile. Months later, at an international technology conference, Elena was invited on stage to share her startup journey. When the host asked, What kept you determined to this day when your whole family once doubted you? Elena did not answer immediately. She looked down at the audience where Camille sat, as the event coordinator assistant busy adjusting microphones, her eyes fixed on the stage. At first I thought I was doing this to prove them wrong, Elena said. But gradually I realized, the most precious thing isn't recognition, but seeing real change in those who once didn't believe in you, and now they believe in themselves. The hall fell silent, then erupted in applause. And Camille at that moment bowed her head deeply. Not because her sister was a famous CEO, but because Camille had learned how to start over and to be grateful to the one who never gave up on her, even when she refused to see that person's true worth. The story of Elena and Camille is not a battle between sisters, but the journey of two women finding their true selves and real value in a world dazzled by superficial fame. Elena won not by revenge, but by holding firm to principles and compassion. Camille learned the most valuable lesson, not from MBA professors, but from the sister the whole family once looked down upon. That success is not what we boast about, but what we quietly build with sweat, perseverance, and honesty with ourselves. In a noisy world, Elena taught her sister, and all of us, that true value doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be strong enough to stand still when everything around it shakes.